In the vast plains of the Llanos, Venezuela, there is a terrifying legend. El Silbón, a wandering ghost, haunts the night with his long, piercing whistle. El Silbón was once a young man named Luis. He was a spoiled child from a wealthy family. His father was harsh and often scolded him, leading to a strained relationship. One day, in a fit of rage, Luis killed his father. He mutilated his father's body and brought his heart home as proof of his horrifying deed. His heartbroken and terrified mother cursed Luis. She said that Luis would be haunted by his father's spirit and would never find peace. Since then, Luis disappeared from the village and was never seen again. The villagers began to hear long, eerie whistles in the middle of the night. El Silbón's whistle grew closer, then suddenly receded. Those who heard the whistle were often found dead the next day, bearing signs of torture. El Silbón's whistle had a strange rhythm: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. Anyone who heard it felt their hair stand on end, and their heart race with fear. The legend said that if the whistle sounded distant, El Silbón was actually very close, and conversely, if it sounded near, he was still far away. One night, a farmer named Juan was walking home after attending a party in a nearby village. The road was dark and silent, lit only by the faint moonlight. Suddenly, Juan heard a long, piercing whistle. He immediately recalled the legend of El Silbón, and fear began to creep over his entire body. The whistle sounded distant, but Juan knew it meant that El Silbón was near. With a racing heart, Juan quickened his pace. However, the whistle grew closer, and he sensed an unseen presence around him. He looked to his right and left, but saw nothing. As he began to run, he felt the air around him grow colder, and a foul stench filled the air. Juan stumbled and fell. As he tried to get up, he saw a tall, gaunt figure standing before him. The figure wore tattered clothes and carried a large sack on his back. His face was pale, and his eyes radiated deep hatred. Paralyzed with fear, Juan could only stare in horror as El Silbón approached. Juan could see that the sack was filled with bones and rotting human organs. He wanted to scream, but his voice was stuck in his throat. As El Silbón reached for his sack, Juan closed his eyes, praying that this was all just a nightmare. Suddenly, the sound of barking dogs echoed in the distance. El Silbón stopped and looked toward the sound. As if disturbed, he vanished into the darkness of the night, leaving Juan trembling and in disbelief. Juan returned to his village with a pale face and vacant eyes. He recounted his experience to the other villagers, warning them of the danger. From that moment on, the villagers became more cautious, praying that El Silbón would not come for them whenever they heard his whistle at night. The legend of El Silbón lived on among the people of the Llanos. Whenever they heard the whistle, fear gripped their hearts. They knew this terror would never end. El Silbón would continue to seek new victims to haunt the quiet nights of the Llanos. The wandering ghost became a symbol of curse and regret. It reminded people of the dangers of violence and hatred. El Silbón was proof that some sins could not be erased, and some spirits would never find peace. Nights in the Llanos grew darker and quieter after sunset. The villagers stayed indoors, making sure their doors and windows were securely locked. They hoped and prayed that they would never hear that long, piercing whistle again. Anyone who heard El Silbón knew that the terror was real. Death could come at any time, without warning. El Silbón was evidence of an eternal curse that continued to haunt the night in the Llanos, without end. A young man named Marcos was walking home from the fields one night. He had heard the stories of El Silbon but dismissed them as mere myths. However, when he heard the long whistle, Marcos felt an overwhelming fear. The whistle sounded distant, but he knew the legend and began to run. A foul smell and cold air enveloped him, making Marcos quicken his pace. He saw a long shadow behind him and tried not to panic. But the shadow drew closer, and Marcos knew El Silbon was near. Without a second thought, he ran towards his friend's nearby house. His friend, Pedro, opened the door hastily upon seeing Marcos's pale face. They both quickly locked the door and hid inside the house. However, the whistle continued, now even closer. Pedro tried to calm Marcos, but they both knew El Silbon was outside. They did not sleep that night. The whistle persisted, and the foul smell permeated the house. When dawn broke, the whistle finally ceased. They cautiously stepped outside, only to find large footprints leading to their home. Pedro and Marcos knew they had been fortunate. Marcos and Pedro's story served as a warning to the other villagers. They became more vigilant, praying not to become the next victims. The legend of El Silbon continued to haunt the Llanos, a tale passed down from generation to generation. This terror never truly vanished. Every time the whistle was heard at night, the villagers knew that death could come at any time, and that the curse of El Silbon would live on forever. Deceptive whistle. El Silbon's whistle has the do-re-mi tune. If it sounds far, he's near, and if it sounds near, he's far. Death's harbinger. Those who hear his whistle often die the next day, showing signs of torture. His presence signals impending doom. Foul stench. El Silbon's presence is marked by a terrible stench. This smell warns of his approach, spreading fear among locals. Bag of death. El Silbon carries a bag with bones and human organs. This gruesome bag contains the remains of his victims. Folklorists and anthropologists study stories of El Silbon. Locals' testimonies about encounters with El Silbon are often investigated for insights. Some believe the legend explains mysterious deaths and strange events. Yet, reports of whistles and sightings persist, fueling fear and intrigue. To this day, the long whistle and foul stench remain an unsolved mystery in the Llanos. Is El Silbon real, or a myth to scare children? Perhaps one day, we'll uncover the truth. Until then, dare to explore the quiet nights of the Llanos. Listen carefully. The whistle might be closer than you think.